Welcome everyone. It is the Sundwall lecture of the year 2022. Finnish Institute at Athens has, since 2006, uh, organized the so-called annual Sundwall lecture, named in honor of Johannes Sundwall. These lectures are given by an internationally renowned scholar with a broad scholarly output dealing with topics that are similar to those of Sundwall's own research, especially in the spheres of Aegean pre and proto-history, linear scripts, Greek and Roman literature, and Attic prosopography. This year, we have a great pleasure to have Professor Emerita Lilian Karali with us this evening, and all of you, very, very warmly welcome. We are at the Swedish Institute at Athens, hosted again by our fantastic neighbors who so wonderfully once again helped us and welcomed us to have their beautiful space here. Thank you, Swedish Institute again. Lilian, I'm going to introduce you briefly, and then the floor and the screen, it's yours. Lilian Karali, as I said, Professor Emerita in Prehistoric and Environmental Archaeology at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. She is going to give our talk tonight. Her doctoral thesis from the year 1979 in the University and Sorbonne, Paris, was entitled L'utilisation des mollusques dans la protohistoire de l'Égée, and that already dealt with the theme of malacology in Aegean prehistory, protohistory, I think it was rather. Yeah. We are very, very pleased to have the pleasure to hear tonight Lilian returning and telling us about the same important matter. She really is certainly a grand figure in environmental archaeology. Actually, I think that Lilian can be named, for reason, to be the mother of the subject in Greece. Once she told me that when she introduced this field, it was very difficult to explain why, within the archaeological academic spheres at that time, what she actually was doing then, since there simply was not a specific subject of environmental archaeology as yet. Yes, you told me that there were questions like, what is it actually that you are doing? And now, yet, it was then Lilian who largely introduced this academic field, as I said. And now, of course, today we all know that nobody would question the validity of environmental archaeology as an important part of every field project in Greece. Lilian has a long, rich, far-reaching, and very productive career. She studied in Athens, continued her studies in the PhD level in Sorbonne, Paris, where she created already then significant scholarly contacts and networks. From 1980s till 2017, Lilian taught in the National Kapodistrian University in Athens on prehistoric archaeology and on this new field of environmental archaeology. She has been very proactive in advancing this very field. She founded a laboratory of environmental archaeology and established a series of seminars in environmental archaeology. She created, for instance, a database on the paleoenvironmental remains from prehistoric excavations in mainland Greece, Crete, and Aegean islands. She's also guided her students in their careers and, of course, carried out her own research and fieldwork in numerous archaeological sites in Greece. Lilian directed the Leontari cave excavations and worked at numerous excavations programs in Greece, but also abroad in Bulgaria, Cyprus, France, Japan, Tunis, and Turkey. Actually, reading and hearing about her own research séjours abroad is wonderful and it's in many ways breathtaking. In 2010s alone, I have counted, Lilian was a visiting professor in Harvard, in Cincinnati, in Kyoto, Japan, Novosibirsk, Siberia, Taiwan, and Beijing. Only in that one decade. So you see that she has carried out research and given talks in seminars and conferences in all continents of the globe, and really has broadened the horizons beyond the, we would say, Euro and American centric Western hemispheres. However, it is not talking but also writing that she excels. She's written 10 books, more than 120 or some articles on environmental archaeology, but also on anthropological approaches to material studies, archaeozoology, zoology, including, of course, archaeomalacology. I have personally also been truly honored to have had a chance to get to know Lilian also as a person and have found a knowledgeable colleague and a dear friend in her. I'm extremely grateful for that. And I'm so happy to have you all here with us tonight to hear Lilian talk on the topic contribution of archaeomalacological research to Aegean archaeology. Welcome.
Dear Dr. Pakanen, dear Director of the Swedish School of Archaeology at Athens, and very dear friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I do thank you very much for coming here tonight. And I will speak to you about my favorite subject, the seashells in archaeology. Um, this is something that, to tell you the truth, fascinates me. And I began my scientific career studying their meaning and their value when we find them in excavations. One thing has been very difficult, the terminology, not for foreigners, but for Greeks. Even foreigners who know Greek, they understand that there was a little bit difficult in the beginning to establish this kind of study. So, in this presentation today, I will present you, first of all, what means finding shells in an excavation, if they are just simple findings, or if they have a certain use, they have had a certain use, such as tools, ornaments, or dietary leftovers. And then further on, if they had a meaning, a symbolic meaning, and if they were represented in art, which is, you know, all of you, that they have been represented a lot in Greek art, and secondary uses, some of them you don't know, and some of them you know already. And the second part will be the subject of purple dye, a very, very important material, which is maybe a kind of, we have maybe there a kind of first place to speak about. It is maybe here the birth of this kind of technique of preparing and thinking how to make purple dye, maybe. And at the end, very, very briefly, I will present you a research project we are now beginning to do together with the director of the Finnish school about purple dye production and the use of purple dye in dyeing leather, which is leather and whatever has to do with the preparation, the whole work about preparing a leather for a certain use is the speciality of my good colleague, Dr. Pakanen. As I told you, I don't like the name of this field. However, this is the international terminology, comes from the biological work of Malakion, Malakostrakon, and it is called in archaeology either the field of malacoarchaeology or archaeomalacology, depends. It is the same. It belongs to the field of zoology and the fundamental field of bioarchaeology. Because, as you know, in environmental archaeology, we have two major fields. We have geoarchaeology and bioarchaeology, whatever has to do with the earth, the sediments, the rocks, etc., and whatever has to do with life, plants, animals, certainly humans. A specific methodology for the examination and analysis of the molluscan material according to the local environment, ecological variations in the archaeological sites has to be applied in order to extract important information about the use of shells. When we find mollusks now in an excavation, it is from now on a real archaeological material. Before I begin these studies, there have been only two people working with working with shells in excavations. They were Shackleton, who wrote a very, very important article about the seashells found in the site of Saliagos in near Antiparos, dating at the Neolithic period, and two other articles written by Henri Chevalier from the Museum of Geology and Natural Sciences in Paris. And he wrote three very important articles. One was about the seashells in the cave of Kitsos near to Lavrion, and the other one, the other two, were about the palace of Malia in Minoan, Crete. So there was not information. It has been extremely difficult, but I'm very happy because I finally contributed a lot in the foundation of this field of research in Greece, together with foreign colleagues who have been interested in this, such as David Rees, a very eminent and very good friend of mine and good researcher. And now I'm honored by my ex-students who are extremely good, Dr. Tatiana Theodorakopoulou and Dr. Veropoulidou Rena. So I'm very happy that now there are Greeks and many foreigners also dealing with this subject. So mollusks then, we don't throw them anymore. We have to look at them and to collect them. So it is very important the method of collecting shells and very important where they are found, the context, as we say in archaeology. So the methods of research are extremely important. The methods which are applied, and certainly it is not just a material to look at, but it has to go through a microscopic and physical-chemical analysis as a material for laboratory, very good for dating. Mollusks are then a very good mean to determine ancient environmental conditions and possible uses of it. The same important are the land snails, not only the seashells, because they also contribute to understand better the environment, but untouchable things of the environment, such as humidity, temperature, so moisture conditions, and therefore also the environment. So we have a lot of information coming from cells about the environment. Mollusks, depending on the species, can be found more or less everywhere. So they can be found at sea, next to the sea, inside the sea, at land, at the banks of the rivers and the lakes. And this is their natural background. And each mollusca species indicates the natural landscape, the way of life, the cultural level of the past human groups, and I will explain to you later on how important they are. And through them, one can trace the temperature, the salinity of the water, because it has to do, and the temperature has to do with the climate. We understand a lot about the climate outside the sea, outside the water, if we understand the temperature of the water. You know that. Now we cannot bath so easily as during summertime, because in summertime it is very good for everyone. Now it is good for winter swimmers, which is very good for the third age, by the way. So we can learn about the fluctuations of the sea level. And my good colleague, Professor Ferentinos is an expert on this because Greece, as you know, till now had a lot of changes of the sea level. And the coastal line has changed a lot. You know that we have the longer and the more, how to say, elaborate coastal line in the Mediterranean. So it is extremely important because actually there are sites which are under the water and sites which are far from the coast. So if we find shells, we can understand a lot. The wave action, by the way, the existence of currents, the ancient tsunamis. We had a lot of tsunamis. I had a case in Kos, in Alassane, where we found a lot of seashells, very, very young, not still, able to be eaten. They were not useful to be eaten. They were not useful to be used for anything. And they were in the site. But it was actually, the site is quite far from the sea. So, and the coastline is different. So the species living there are very different from the species living there in the past. And this is extremely interesting because finally, studying also the sediments by the geologists, certainly, not by me, we understood that this was the action of a tsunami. And certainly there was a very big tsunami around the 4th century after Christ, around 316, if I'm not wrong. And this tsunami brought all of this fauna from the coast in the city, and then from there, from the settlement, the waves went back, so they left behind most of these shells. So we can trace also the tsunami and the old coastal line, which has changed actually. We can also see the formation of the seabeds, if they are sandy, muddy, etc., something which happens usually by the alluvions brought by the rivers at the deltaic areas. So we have all the deltaic hypothesis there. And from this, we can understand also the landscape, which is extremely interesting. And you understand that it is finally not so difficult to understand all this. Why? Because, according to the biologists, we know exactly each species where it lives. One species can live, for example, the monodonta, in the rocky shores, rocky areas, and quite close to the coast, on the rocks. And the other species have different, how to say, heights from the bottom where they live. So different biotopes. The same for the sandy shores. So finally, it is not so difficult to have an idea about the shore line, about the landscape of the time, and certainly through this about the way of living of people. So from what we say, we want to say that shells have a very important role as environmental indicators. And I hope that I explained to you quite clearly how this scientifically can be right. Concerning the rivers and the lakes, we were able to certify that there were lakes or there were rivers, even if they're not now, if they are dried by now, to understand the salinity, because depending on the salinity, we have different mollusk species. If the salinity is middle, low, even lower, other organisms that may live there, and the bottom of the banks, how profound they were. Concerning the natural land, and we can say that we can find studying in the laboratory, the shell now, only the shell. Find the pH, very important. Find the concentration of calcium, the humidity, the porosity of the soil, the flora. For example, if we have land snails, there are specific land snails, everybody knows that they live only in the gardens or in the fields, or they come when there is extremely humid and they can live everywhere, or carnivorous, some of them. And understand the sediments then and the formation processes of the sediments, because we find such species as also as fossils during the excavation in sediments that in geological strata, therefore. So, once again, we have valuable indicators for establishing an environmental reconstruction. This is something extremely important because we should try to understand under which conditions people were living. For example, by architecture, we can understand that in the islands of the Aegean, the winds were extremely strong always. How do we know that? Because the houses have small windows, not very large, and then the corners of the houses are around it. Why? Because the wind is extremely noisy if it hurts on the corner. Otherwise, it passes more easier. So we can have such information from everything, information having from the architecture, having information about the environment from land snails and sea mollusks. And we can have also combine our information then with other kind of findings, living organisms such as animals, plants, more traditional findings, and more archaeological findings like frescoes. Because it is not strange if on one fresco we see a representation, and it is not always something that did not exist in Greece. We're not very sure about it. So Greece has been through an environmental change through time. We said about the coastal line, which is always changing and still changing, about the volcanic and tectonic activity, about the tsunamis, etc. So I have a nice example here. You can see Macedonia, and you can see Thessaloniki here. I have been studying the shells of inside sites, and looking at these shells, uh, it was strange because these sites were actually very far from the coast in Stavroupoli and in Thermi, very far from the coast. What does it mean? There is a river and there are alluvions. And during the Neolithic period, it was normal because people were not silly. They were not trafficking shells, seashells very far away because they were poisonous after that. They were becoming dangerous. So it was very close to the sea, and now it is quite far inside because there are a lot of alluvions. And the coastal line of Thessaloniki, where is Kalamaria, for example, and all these areas, it was the sea there. It was different. And this thanks to the shells. So, the most common mollusk species from Greek sites, you can see them here. It was the first table I made about the seashells, most common in the Greek excavations that I have studied. And what I personally find almost everywhere, wherever I study, are cardium, different species of cardium, subspecies of cardium, murex, and patella, as well as monodonta, ostrea, etc. It means that we had many oysters before and many other species which are disappearing now. Many species have disappeared and they are going to disappear too because not only of pollution but also of the way of fishing actually. And okay, environmental indicators and all this. So after that, we can say that we find shells. More than the environment, what they say to us depends if the shell is just crushed or just destroyed, or it is the shell is worked or not worked. Shells can come just by themselves, as I told you, from a tsunami for anything, but they can be the result of a human action, such as fishing. So they have been used as food. They were used also as baits in order to catch other organisms, fishes. And usually, how do we understand this? If we find a lot in a quantity and in dimensions quite, I would say, good for consumption. So if you find such a patella, it means nothing for the diet. If you find a big basket of patellas, and they're quite big one, so it means that they're good for eating. So it was a kind of a dish, and weight are not sufficient in order to not to be hungry, because people need to eat a lot in order not to feel hungry after that. And the traces on them can tell to us if they have been used in diet, or if they have been worked, or if the people have used the hole they made in order to extract the animal from the inside and to consume it, or not. It is a different kind of hole. Sometimes this hole can have a secondary use afterwards, but usually we can understand which kind of a hole it is and why. And they have been also used afterwards, many of them, due to natural or human intervention. Some were, broken before by accident, or they were broken by man. They have been used as tools and ornaments from the very beginning, and many kinds of tools, such as spatulas, spoons, different types and size, like most of them are from Mytilus and Spondylus. Shell ornaments have been out of different kind of shells, and usually we find pendants, we find beads, we find bracelets, and mostly of them, the very important bracelets of the Neolithic period out of Spondylus. So, when in diet, look here. Here we have a big dish of patella to the right, found in Santorini, in Akrotiri. Up, we have a sea urchin. This was not consumed. But down, we have a consumed sea urchin, because this was found with the garbage, the leftovers of the dishes, and we will find just the spines and the crushed exterior part of the shell. Shell processing is not very easy, but people were very good even from the Paleolithic, as you know, processing difficult materials, not only the stone, but processing also bones, animal bones, and shells. So you see the techniques here, and you see interesting objects they have been making, like weights, tools, and ornaments. And sometimes they had to cut small pieces and make beads, as you see here, these small beads, the round beads, or taking parts of them and making smaller ornaments like pendants or parts of a kind of necklace. Here you see spoons and fish hooks. Here are the spoons, very nice spoons, uh, out of shell. They had probably also some of them a kind of a wooden part here in order to hold them better. You have some excellent fish hooks. Here you have pixies. This was found in a grave, and it was so precious probably that it was broken. And you see, they made holes here in order to put again this part of the shell. And this is even better for the ladies, because it was a kind of for cosmetics, a kind of small box for cosmetics, and still preserves inside some red color, and comes from Akrotiri, Santorini. So we have a lot of ornaments. If we speak about an ornament, it is very important to know the important things about the provenance of the material, the general element where it was put, if we wear it like a necklace, like a ring, like an earring, like a bracelet, or whatever it is, and the criterion of choice, why we wear it. We wear it to show that we are different. We wear it to show that we are men or women. We wear it to show that we are better, that we belong to the elite. Why we wear some of them? It is important also to see, according to the use, the classification, because we have, as I told you, bracelets, pendants, discs, rings, and beads, and they come either from unworked valves, or from worked valves. For example, here you have a necklace, and these are not really worked. There is just a perforation here in order to be able to hang them. And the rest are beads also, but it is they're whole seashells. They just made again a hole in order to make this kind of string. How do they make this? By specific working methods, the valve shaping technique, perforations. Usually, they are human, but they can be from Lithophagus, but they have a different morphology if they are from Lithophagus, or natural, so they are not so well done. Um, and when they are human, they are very elaborate usually. There is an abrasion of the curved zone and sometimes trepanation, as I have shown to you before, when I have shown you the working process. So here you make by abrasion this hole, it is made by human action. Here it is a natural. It is a natural. I mean, the shell, this species has not a hole, but it it became, I don't know how, by a natural way. I don't know how. And here, yes, they have a hole, but probably this is because patellas are attached on the rock. So when you try to take them out of the rock, usually there is this thing where wants to break the cone, the conal apex there. So most of them, they are natural, and after that, some of them, they had some human work on it, on them. And here you see a lot of beads and pendants out of shell. The major and the most discussed category of jewelry made out of shell was during the Neolithic, um, mainly during the late Neolithic, bracelets out of spondylus. Spondylus is a very, very nice seashell, sea mollusk, very nice sea mollusk, and, and which has a shell, looks like marble. And it has in the inside very nice color, like marble, which is white and pinkish. And if it is well worked, it is difficult to understand to someone who is not used to work with shells if it is out of bone or out of marble. So to someone who is not dealing with it, it's very difficult. And they are very important. You see, working has many phases, different phases, in order to have a final product like that. And from the other parts, they can make a pendant, as you see here, or a bead. So they have played a very important role because they have been an object of exchange and trade during the Neolithic. Beads and bracelets, mainly out of spondylus, and of Glycymeris also, which is much smaller, but it is quite frequent, mostly in northern Greece. And we can find also in other places, but in northern Greece is much more. I mean about Glycymeris, it is very, very common. And in northern Greece, we have mainly spondylus in Thessaloniki, Sitagri, Dimitra, Dikilitas, and many other sites. And also in the northern countries, Serbia, Romania, and Central Europe, Austria, Germany, even France, quite probably it came there as a traded material. It came there as exchanged precious symbolic and special object. How it went there? By walking groups of traders, probably. They were walking next to the rivers or maybe floating in the rivers with, because they knew how to use the waterways from the very beginning. And through the Dunabian areas, Paradunabian areas, they were reaching to the center of Europe, to Central Europe, to Germany, and from there even they reached up to Paris, if you can imagine. So this kind of jewelry had a meaning. because we have found also not worked specimens, not worked valves of spondylus, which means that they were either exchanging or even working and manufacturing them during their travel, or just exchange them as they were and leaving them to the local people to work with them. Here you see how looks this mollusk from the outside, how it looks from the inside when found in excavation. It has lost its beautiful color. And you see some bracelets made out of spondylus coming from Dikilitas in northern Greece. So shells have not only this kind of uses, ornamental uses, but they also have symbolic uses. So these shells had also symbolic use, because as I told you, the bracelets out of spondylus were probably a prestigious um, object. It was something for probably for more, how to say, for people of an elite, different from the others, from an upper class. Why? Because it was coming from a very far away country, and we don't find them so easily everywhere. A few people were wearing them, and we know that they were wearing them because we found in the cemetery of Varna in Bulgaria skeletons wearing such ornaments, and some they were broken, and people had repaired them in order to be able to wear them again. Here you see on the map how far they have been traveling, probably from Greece, quite probably from Greece. Among the symbolic uses, as we told about the spondylus, that were prestigious objects, we have other objects like worked shells making figurines, human shaped figurines or animal shaped. We have a beautiful animal shaped figurine, a small um, a bear coming from Kichos cave, Neolithic period, and another beautiful that I was very lucky. I found it in the material of Keros, and I was so happy when I found it because it was very, very small like that, and it was together, with a lot of fragments, dietary leftovers, and I will never forget this evening. It was something very important. So, human shaped, animal shaped figurines, and even games out of conus, the shell conus. They were using it as a game, and later on, they were filling it inside with metal later on during the Bronze Age and later on in order to play how we play with Zarya today, something like that. And we have a lot of artistic representations, most of them with a symbolic meaning, not only an environmental meaning. We have seals, frescoes, variety of objects, and vessels, painted vessels. So, symbolism on shells can be distinguished by shells not only by their, how to say, their morphology, also by the kind of shell. Triton is such an object, which can be found also in graves very often. And also it has another symbolism, not only in graves, it can be found in ritual pits, in sacred places, in houses in the foundations of the house, and in art. And in art, it means probably something. Here, underneath, you see a kind of vessel. And we have the famous seal, coming from Ideonandron, where we have the priestess holding this big triton. And this has been discussed a lot because people were thinking at the beginning that she was, trying to, to make music out of it, to blow, but she was not blowing probably after what Professor Niemeyer was telling. She was using it for a ritual, like a vessel. And so here you see also the hole. Sometimes it's very useful, this hole. It helps for the liquid inside, like that. This is good for elevation. The symbolism in Greek mythology of Triton is very important because Triton is one of the most symbolic objects. We have the god Triton. He is a messenger of the sea, and he has a Triton shell, and he's blowing to calm or to raise the waves according to his temper and to what he wants to do. And we have the famous marine style pottery from Crete, from Minoan Crete. You see here these are my own designs. Uh, Good, no, no colors, but I'm proud about them. So here you have an octopus. Here we have tritons, or could be also murexes, but I think they're tritons, although I would like them to be murexes. They are tritons. And you see the seals. So representations on seals is very, very important. And we are studying this together about my ex-student and now collaborator and colleague, Athina, Dr. Athina Chroni. We are having such a study about gems and about seals. And you see, they mean a lot. Here you see, for example, an octopus. Here you see some squids, Sepia officinalis here. Here a beautiful triton, an octopus again, more abstract this one. Here you see Sepia officinalis. So there are a lot and they have a symbolic meaning because, seals were not for nothing. They were not like, I wear the representation of a seal and this is just a seal. It is more than a seal. It is something very important. So, what we have, what we learn from shells then? A lot of things. And we don't have to throw them. Don't we have to oversee them and make an excavation and not look at them because they can be food remains, they can be baits, they can be tools and weapons because we have also kind of weapons. We have some mace heads out of them. I have found in the Kilitas. We have building material. This is very important, and I have seen that in Akrotiri. It exists in Ermioni because in the walls, the sediment, they use them crushed in order, like cement. Eh, You know that. And also we have them for insulation in Akrotiri. There are some areas where we have the sacred basins. The floor is out of it. Why? Because it is not just earth, it is not just soil. So the water does not pass. It is a kind of cement. And the same is for areas I will show you, like in Santorini, in Akrotiri. They are also there as sediments. And in this area, in the area A, in Akrotiri, in the building A, they were storing wine and probably olive oil. And they had canalizations under, on the floor and this kind of sedimentation because they were not using the liquid like that. It was, driven to a specific area. It was kind of a small basin and they were collecting it there. So, building material, artifacts, we have said a lot about the artifacts, figurines, lamps, vessels, jewels, like rings, bracelets, pendants, beads, etc. Precious dyes, like the purple dye, I will speak to you now, and a part of a ritual, which I have spoken to you already, and which continued through the ages. So, purple dye is a technological achievement, extremely important. It is an invention, big invention. And similar achievements can be noted in various civilizations and environments, and not only from the three species I will speak to you, which we find in the Aegean and in the Mediterranean, but also in Japan with similar but different species, in the Atlantic, in the Americas, South and Northern America, in the Pacific, and in many other areas. So, what I love in archaeology is this universal meaning, is this kind of similar lives of people all over the world. And this is something which unites us. And I think this is one of the good parts of archaeology. You see, similar ways of life, people are inventing from similar but not exactly the same materials the same things. Now, speaking about dyes, a beautiful red color from blue to dark red to bright blue to bright red. So, we have in many parts of the world, and now we know that it is a chemical composition. We know a lot about purple dye presence from the mythology already, because from Homer we know about Hercules. It seems that uh, he was the first to speak about purple. Probably, according to the mythology, Hercules invented purple dye because his dog was chewing some mollusks at the seaside, and his mouth became red, chewing some of them. I hope that my daughter's dogs will not do that because she will be terrified. She will think that her dogs are sick. Theodora, I'm afraid for that. So, second, many divinities were in red, like Perseus, Theseus, Jason, and Aphrodite was associated also with the red color, and she was known as Cytherea and Cyprus because, as I told you at the beginning, among the very few studies about seashells when I began my research was an excellent study of Chrysula Kardara about Cythera. And she was very well describing the production establishments there, and it is still very important information about the areas where people were manufacturing this dye. So Aphrodite is known also as Cytherea from Cythera, associated to the red color, and of Cyprus because we had also in Cyprus this kind of color. We have a lot of written evidence in Homer, as I told you, Simonides, Plato, Herodotus, Xenophon, Plutarch, Vitruvius, Aristotle, Pliny the Elder, Xenocrates, and many others. And we have also the archaeological evidence, finally. But there is a big tragedy, and I don't agree with most of my colleagues dealing with the subject, because all the archaeologists and the specialists attempted to see purple dye wherever they excavate. And this is a tragedy. If they find a murex, it is immediately purple dye installation. Yes, but murex can be a bait, can be the leftover of a meal, a dish, can be whatever, can be found by accident. Some people have, collected some of them or by any other way. So one should be very careful. One should study very carefully the typology of the shell fragments found in excavation, because at the very beginning, it depends also on the chronology. At the very beginning, what they were doing, they were just crushing the shell. But crushing the shell, it was a big distraction, because crushing the shell, they were distracting the how to say the chair of the mollusk. So the mollusk, it was the color coming out of it was not very good, because what we need is the gland of the mollusk, and it was a little bit lost most of the color. This is the important thing, because we need a big quantity of mollusks in order to have just 1 gram of this kind of dye. This is why it was so expensive. So depends on the typology. After a certain period, when people, learned this technique better, they were not crushing. They were just making holes or cutting the murex. So this has to do with the period of the excavation, and this has to do with the morphology of the crushed shell. So there are many fragmentation techniques then, and we have to be careful. And mostly the chronological period is what is the most important in this case. So we have to have installations. If we don't have installations, it is very difficult. Some colleagues say that they can have in small quantity homemade dye. Okay, but very small quantity. Very small, extremely small. So we must have cisterns, water canalizations. We must have a whole, complex. if we speak about a normal production. If we want just, 1 gram, okay. We have to have relevant objects like pots, woven materials, tools, etc. If we don't have all this, okay, and we have crushed murexes, can be, cannot be. It is very difficult to suggest something because for me, there is a big difference between the reality and the theory, the theoretical approach. So we must be careful because all my colleagues, Greeks and foreigners, they are tempted wherever they find murexes and similar species to say that there is a purple dye factory. Okay, so you see here some fragmentations of the very beginning, but they try to open the shell, to cut it and take off the gland. So here they have not destroyed it up, you see. Here they have not destroyed it. But here they're completely crushed. So the main species are Murex trunculus. There is another tragedy, in archaeomalacology. People are changing all the time the scientific names. I don't know why. So you have to write down 10 different names uh, about if you wanted to present and to recognize a mollusk. So, Murex trunculus or Exaplex trunculus or Trunculus, etc. Okay, this one. The second is Murex brandaris or Bolinus brandaris, etc. And the third one is Thais, uh, Hemastoma, Purpura hemastoma, etc. So these three types are the very usual in Greece. And the most important is that each one gives a different color. This is very important because according to the color, probably was the price. So the economic part of it and the symbolic meaning of it. See, three different colors, blue, red, and a kind of, I don't know, how do you call the third color, between red and purple. Purple. So we spoke about purple production and trade, about the relation of the human group with the human communities with seafaring, and because they had to transport. In order to transport their goods, they needed boats. And we were speaking the last days in class about boats in antiquity and about some of the very precious um, goods they were trading. So imagine how precious was this object. So trade has played a significant role in the expansion of purple dye as a color, and certainly it was a luxurious symbolic trade good for clothing, for pieces of art, etc. The Mediterranean world has been using this kind of purple, of color, this kind of dye. We can find a little bit all around. There are abundant archaeological data pertaining to the purple trade industry support, and probably there is a big geographical area of dispersion and a huge number later on of production sites. At the beginning, we did not have many, but afterwards, we had many. The problem is the provenance. Purple dye is well known mostly to Europe and abroad as Tyrian or Phoenician. Why? Because they were the big traders, good traders, the best traders, Phoenicians. And we have two important sites. We have the site of Tyrus and of Tyre and the site of Sido, where they were fishing and making purple dye, for sure. And we have dates. It seems that finally the oldest dates come from the Middle East, for the Middle East I speak, come from Israel, from the site of Minet el Beida, from the 15th to 14th century before Christ. However, excavations in Crete in southern Crete have proved that there was also there in southern Crete a kind of local fabrication, local production of purple. And this is dated before 1750, so much earlier. We don't know. We cannot say now, but from the until now, it seems that this is the oldest, at least in Eastern Mediterranean. Maybe the inhabitants of the Aegean have been the pioneers for the use of purple and the production of purple. Maybe. Until now, we are finding many areas in Greece where probably they had purple dye. For example, we have certainly in Akrotiri. However, in Akrotiri, we cannot find it easily because this is a city, a real settlement, a very luxurious place with big buildings where we have made the excavations. A very, very, how to say, chic place. We have the first toilet in the Aegean there. Sorry for, for this reference, but what does it mean? If you have a toilet, it means that people do not like smells, bad smells. If they don't like bad smells, it means that they have a high level of everyday life. But if next to it you have an installation for purple dye production, it smells awfully bad, awfully bad. So it is impossible in such a complex of buildings, very, very luxurious buildings, to have in there a place where people were producing purple dye. Probably there was purple dye because the amount of crushed murex shells is huge, but it was further on. We don't know where. Maybe under the sea, as we have lost most of Santorini. Maybe down at the bottom of the sea there. We don't know where, but certainly it was not until now in some area in the excavations. Impossible. We have places, many places from the very beginning, from the late Minoan and the Mycenaean, in Crete, Knossos, Palekastro, Koufonisi, etc., and manufacture of purple dye together with wool dye in there. So we have an interesting indication about this kind of production. Later on, then, in general, during the Bronze Age, we have a lot of purple dye locations in Greece. And we see also the way that people were trading it, their boats from Akrotiri, their boats from other small representations on figurines. Here is Akrotiri, here is the West House, and here is the area A, if I'm not wrong. And here are many places where we have these floors with the huge amount of crushed murex shells. And here you see the place I told you where they have this canalization and the big jars where they were storing probably wine and olive oil or wine or olive oil. And here you see how were these floors, the insulation. And we have here also the paint in this on this fresco. The body of the fisherman is painted with the colors, and the color comes from murex shell, but it does not come according to the to Eleni Aloupi, Dr. Aloupi from the archaeometry laboratory. It does not come from the gland of the shell. It comes from the shell, from the crushed shell. I cannot tell you, but it is extremely interesting. Probably she knows better than me. During the historical period, we have many workshops for purple dye production. Kythera, Laconia, Corinth, Hermione, Crete, Cyprus, Rhodes, Kos, Nisiros, which was called also Porphyris because in Nisiros they were producing a lot of purple dye, Amorgos, Chios, and in Asia Minor, in Phocia, Lydia, and Phrygia. Purple dye during the Roman period was so important, and there were people of the higher classes wearing, red garments, and it was also a symbol of priesthood, political and military authority. And the very luxurious thing is that Julius Caesar and Cleopatra had also even furniture, their furniture draped with purple covers, extremely expensive, very luxurious life. And one of the most important properties of purple dye is that this color is color color fast. It means that it does not go away easily. It is non-fading, and we need, according to various studies, something like 2,000 Murex glands, so 10,000 Murex shells, in order to produce just one row of a woolen toga. So difficult, expensive. During the Byzantine Empire, purple dye production in Greece continued, and we continue to have the purple color symbol of priesthood and symbol of royalty. The emperors were wearing purple garments, and even Constantine Porphyrogenitos was born in a very prestigious room, which was draped also by purple dyed tissues. So we have a lot of red color. In the Christian religion, also in Christianity, purple dye has been extremely important. Again, it was a symbol of, something more important for ritual and for regal clothing. So only for kings and for the priests and for the holy persons. But at the end of the Byzantine Empire, things have become very difficult because, first of all, purple dye was produced in coastal places, coastal sites. But at this time, there was a lot of piracy, many wars, and then came the Turkish occupation. With the Turkish occupation came different beliefs, a different religion. So, for some Eastern communities and religious groups, purple color became the same bad as black, as is the black color for us, had a negative meaning, and it had to do with grief and bad luck. So they did not need it, the terms, and it stopped. And now, very shortly, this is what we intend to do then with my good colleague, Dr. Kakanin. We are making a joint environmental archaeological project concerning malacological studies, purple production, and we will select some related production centers by the presence of same installations, because it seems that preparing leather, working with leather, uh, you have to have some specific installations. We have to check exactly if are really the same as the purple dye installations, or if they can be used the same way. To find interconnections between craft industries, transmission of different techniques and technologies in the working of various materials, because people could share similar techniques and probably could make the leather, which was not cheap also, it was an expensive material, uh, color it, dye it with such a nice dye, such a nice color. Each case study we have must be related to the purple dye production and tanning processes. So we have to try to find places related to both techniques. And the problem is that until now there is a lack of criteria, definitive criteria for the identification of production establishments. We cannot find for now because everyone has its own criteria. To find a new methodology and a new approach in order to marry these two different products, we have to find exactly the production facilities and also the scope of all this, to associate it with the odors, as I told you, because both do not smell very well, and the location of the production sites, if they are next to water resources, because there is need of water in both cases, uh, if the raw material is available on the sites, and all this. And also, we have to try to understand finally what happened in history, because the main purpose of archaeology is to assist in history and give a good basis in history, because we are the material evidence, and the material evidence must be true. Thank you very much for your patience, and thank you very much for coming tonight. And thank you very much for inviting me. It has been an honor to me. Thank you.
First of all, to thank you very much for this informative and a really, really nice lecture, which I'm sure that most of us, we have learned something and to see how rich field and the prone to yield information for much beyond that we usually think the seashells are, and what kind of possibilities this field provides for furthering the new areas of investigations for us as well. Thank you.